The New Orleans Breakers have been eliminated from the 2023 USFL playoffs. For the second consecutive year, the Breakers have been blown out in the South Division Championship by the Stallions. This was bad. They got absolutely destroyed in this game. The final score was 47-22, but that actually makes the game look closer than it was. Yes, you heard that. A 25-point beatdown makes it look closer than it was. Because 15 of those 22 points by the Breakers and only 7 by the Stallions were in the fourth quarter. Essentially, at the end of the third quarter, it was 40-7. Now, to be fair, the Breakers were right about to score the touchdown. They scored their first touchdown really early in the fourth quarter. But still, absolutely creamed. And you can see that in the team stats. Time of possession, the Stallions won it by about 4.5 minutes. So clearly, they must have really done well running the ball. Well, they did, but they did well in everything. They had one less drive, and in fact, one less play, yet still obliterated the Breakers in yards per play at 8.9 to the Breakers' 5.6. And don't even get me started. 201 more yards than the Breakers. That is obliteration in a way we have very rarely seen in football. The Stallions also had one less turnover. But then we go to the passing stats. Compare it. 9.9 yards per attempt by the Stallions to 5.5 by the Breakers. 31 attempts by the Stallions, 50 by the Breakers. Yet the Stallions, despite having 19 less attempts, beat the Breakers 308 to 273 in passing yards. Then it gets really bad at rushing. The Stallions had 30 rushing attempts, the Breakers 13, and beat them 245 to 97 yards. In simple terms, that's 6.1 yards per carry by the Breakers, 8.2 by the Stallions. Absolute destruction. And the best way to see it is just the quarterback and running back comparison. When you look at it, the Stallions had 3 players, which included the QB Magoo, have at least 70 yards rushing, whereas the Breakers had 2 guys who had 27 and 30. They also had like a 22-yard rusher as well, but it was like a single run and then one that lost, so really, the Breakers had 2 real running backs, and the Stallions had 2 plus Magoo, and they crushed him. First of all, though, let's talk about the quarterbacks. McCoy Bethel-Thompson got absolutely outplayed by Magoo. Even without the 2 interceptions Bethel-Thompson threw, Magoo still outclassed him by a mile. In total, MBT had 26 of 50 attempts, meaning he barely had a 50 completion percentage, which, remember, you should be at least 60. And then yards-wise, he had 273 on 50 attempts. Magoo had 310 on 31. He also had a 67.7 completion percentage, far better than MBT. And MBT's TD interception ratio was 2-2 versus Magoo's 4-0. That led to MBT having a 64.8 passer rating. That's pretty bad. But how about 139.8 by Magoo? That is one of the best. In fact, this is probably the best game a single player has had in the USFL in the modern USFL. The only ones that come to mind is that one obscene Cookus performance last year, Luis Aguilar's 8-for-8 field goal day, and there's maybe one other performance by a defender. I mean, this was insane. And then when you add the fact that Magoo had 84 yards on the ground and a TD on the ground, oh my gosh. Speaking of the ground game, the Breakers once again had none of it. Well, let me rephrase that. They chose not to have a ground game. Look, even though it's not like Wes was having a good game, Wes still averaged much better than his last 3 weeks. As even if you eliminate his 12 long, which puts him at 18 yards on 6 attempts for 3 yards per carry, that 3 yards per carry is still way better than the last 3 weeks of the season he's been at. And then Jones, he also had one really long rush. You eliminate his 15-yard rush. He only has 12 yards, but even then he's still averaging 4 yards per carry. Essentially, they had 2 running backs who were averaging 3 and 4 respectively, yet they never used them. Now, 3 yards per carry isn't good, but when you consider the fact that Wes had been averaging like 2 yards a carry or 1.8 yards a carry the last 3 weeks and they were winning, you'd think they'd run the ball between their 2 main running backs more than 11 times. The worst part is it's not like all of these came in the first quarter or something. No. Some of them were, and then they just did like a rush here or there. Essentially, the team just gave up on running the ball after like their second drive and then just did a couple rushes here and there for no reason. Breakers really didn't need to stop running the ball until like late in the second quarter, and even then he still could have run the ball a decent amount. Instead, they just gave up on it. The Stallions, they didn't give up on passing. They still did both and still obliterated the Breakers with both. But the Breakers, I don't know why they passed so much. It never was working out for them, as you can clearly tell by MBT's bad completion percentage and passer rating. So I don't get it. Overall, the Breakers, they got clowned on. I mean, at least early on in the voting, you guys have voted that this game was the worst game in the modern USFL, and that's probably because of the fact that this was a complete destruction. That basically, after 1.5 quarters, looked to be over, and then after 2 full quarters, we knew was over. Breakers absolutely trounced. But at least you Breakers fans can take solace in knowing that your team has made the playoffs both years in the modern USFL, which is something that the Bandits / Showboats and the Gamblers have yet to do. So at least there's that. And I guess there's always next year, so good luck.